Secretary of State Marco Rubio was on CBS over the weekend discussing the latest on the negotiations of a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine.
We don't want to be involved in this process of just endless talks. There has to be some progress, some movement forward. Ultimately, one of the things that could help break this logjam, perhaps the only thing that can, is a direct conversation between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. And he's already openly expressed a desire and a belief that that needs to happen.
Well, earlier today, reportedly, those conversations took place. Here to discuss this and more is Ambassador John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor and Ambassador to the United Nations. He is also the author of Surrender is Not an Option, Defending America at the United Nations and Abroad, and the Room Where It Happened, a White House memoir. Ambassador Bolton, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Before we jump into the Middle East and kind of what took place there last week, I want to talk about Ukraine, Russia. President Trump engaged in a phone conversation this morning with Russian President Vladimir Putin. This has been, I think, frustrating for President Trump. He thought he would have this thing resolved quickly. It's not been. Is Putin, is he being straightforward in these conversations he's been having with President Trump?
Well, I think he's not being straightforward if he's saying he's eager to find a way to get a ceasefire, notwithstanding that it might be in Russia's interest to have a ceasefire given the enormous casualties that they've suffered over the 3+ years since the Russian invasion. I think Putin believes that momentum on the battlefield, slight though it is moving in Russia's direction. And as long as that's the case, he's happy to continue the war, notwithstanding the huge cost in life and resources to his government. I think what he really wants is to make either a ceasefire or an ultimate solution to this directly with Donald Trump. He doesn't want to have to deal with Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky. He doesn't want to have to deal with all the European leaders. He would like to have basically a one-on-one resolution with Trump because he thinks he knows how to get what he wants from Trump. I think this call today was something that Putin wanted. We may see in the near future as well an actual meeting between the two of them, which Putin, I think, would like to see because it would help bring him out of international isolation.
What does he want other than kind of this image makeover? Is he wanting President Trump to agree to allow him to keep the land that he's taken in Ukraine?
Yes, I think that's a very important point. And in comments by J.D. Vance and others in the administration, I think that's already been given to Putin if that view holds. Vance said as far back during the campaign that Ukraine was not going to be returned to its full sovereignty and territorial integrity. Ukraine would not join NATO. NATO would not provide security guarantees, which are pretty critical elements from Ukraine's point of view, because even if they get a ceasefire now, remember they had a ceasefire back in 2014 after the first Russian invasion, and it took the Kremlin 8 years to invade again. It may take another long period before a third invasion takes place. But Zelensky wants to find a way to prevent the third invasion before it happens, which is why he's pressed so hard for security guarantees.
Is that not maybe part of the rare earth minerals, that agreement that might bring American interest permanently into Ukraine that could provide some level of protection?
I think that's the long-range intent. I agree with that, and I think the minerals deal is a political plus for Zelensky. But digging mines is not a short-term operation, particularly since a lot of the minerals we're talking about are in areas near the current front line. Some of them actually behind the Russian position now. But undoubtedly, getting that minerals deal signed moved beyond what happened in the Oval Office on February the 28th. I think we're back on an even keel with Zelensky now, and for that reason alone, I think it was important to get done.
Let me ask you about that, Ambassador Bolton, because it appeared there for a while that the Trump administration kind of seeing Vladimir Zelensky as the kind of the holdout here, the hard one to deal with. And it appears that now they're starting to see that it's Putin that does not want to come to a peaceful agreement.
Right. Well, Zelensky and the Ukrainians believe they're fighting for their freedom and independence. So you can understand perhaps why they're not inclined to trade much of that away. Putin is trying to recreate the Russian Empire. This is something he said beginning back in 2005 and repeated many, many times since then. And for the Russian dream of a renewed Russian Empire, it absolutely has to include Ukraine. So there are strong reasons on both sides, not the same reasons by any stretch of the imagination. And it's because Putin thinks, rightly or wrongly, that his chances are on the upswing here that have made him really the obstacle. He doesn't want to stop when he thinks he's ahead.
So are we dealing with a rational individual when we're talking about Vladimir Putin? In his approach to negotiations, or is he driven by this vision that overrides what we would call a rational man view?
No, I think he's rational. I've met with him any number of times over the years. First time just a month or so after 9/11, when I accompanied Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld to Moscow to talk about things we needed to go after al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan. And in several of the meetings I've had with him after we've discussed some issue or another on which we didn't reach agreement, Putin would say in English sometimes, which he speaks relatively well, he'd say, well, you have your logic, we have ours, we'll see which one prevails. His logic is the logic of recreating the Russian Empire.
Well, we're almost up against a break, Ambassador Bolton, because I want to switch now to the Middle East. The president making a kind of whirlwind trip through there, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, bypassing Israel. It's caused some to speculate, is there a rift in that relationship? But talking about rational in Russia, I think there's a different element at play in the Middle East that I don't think the United States and our foreign policy have always gotten right. And I want to talk about that when we come back. So I'll give you a moment to think about that as we head into a break. Ambassador, thanks for sticking around. I want to go to the Middle East. Last week, the president was there. What do you make of his trip?
Well, I think the major emphasis was continuing a policy we've had really now for over 40 years of trying to bind the Gulf Arab states closer to the United States. We face the common threat from Iran, both its nuclear weapons program and its support for terrorism. That's the same threat that the state of Israel sees, so our interests there are really aligned. And we're also trying to continue the long-standing U.S. policy of keeping China and Russia effectively as far removed from influencing events in the Middle East as we can. So there was a lot of flash and pomp about the business deals that were announced, but that's the kind of indication of the tightness of the connection between the U.S. and the three states that President Trump visited: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. So I think it was very successful. I think there's some other aspects, notably Syria, that I think are more disturbing. But that part of it, I think, was a clear success.
It's kind of a delicate dance. I mean, when you look at the history of Saudi Arabia, Qatar in particular, UAE is a little different. I mean, they're kind of a standout. They're a little more open to Western values to some degree. They have religious freedom to a degree there in that country. Saudi Arabia, not a single church. And both Qatar and Saudi Arabia been connected to financing terrorism. How do we make that relationship in such a way, in an environment where there's an ideologically driven motive to really conquer the West?
Well, I think the threat coming from Iran is something that disturbs everybody else in the region, and it comes in the form of both Shia and Sunni terrorists and people who would just as soon see us gone from the region entirely. You know, I think there's change coming across the Gulf Arab states, including Saudi and Qatar, and I think it's going to be unpredictable and hard to constrain. But there's a lot going on. I think had it not been for the Hamas attack on Israel on October the 7th in 23, I really do think that Saudi Arabia was very close to an Abraham Accord deal with Israel. I think there's still a lot going on under the surface. The structure of many of the governments there and the way the culture has evolved isn't exactly how we would do it. But I think there's plenty of room for progress on areas of mutual interest, particularly dealing with the threat from Iran.
You mentioned October the 7th, Ambassador. Has Israel's success in taking on Iran and its proxies, did it set the stage for last week's historic meetings?
Yeah, I really think that beginning with the Abraham Accords, you could see how the tectonic plates in the Middle East were changing, that the common view of the Gulf Arab states and Israel on the threat from Iran has even dating back to the late 20-teens, was beginning to show its effects. But now, since October the 7th, the balance of power in the region has materially changed. The Israelis have pummeled key terrorist surrogates that Iran had built up with billions of dollars of aid over the years. So they've deeply wounded Hamas and Hezbollah. The Houthis still need some more work, but the Assad regime, a key ally of Iran, has fallen in Syria. And Israel itself has struck Iran's ballistic missile production facilities back in October, doing considerable damage. So if you look around, Iran's strength is significantly reduced. And the real question now is, will Israel deal with the Iranian nuclear program if the Iranians don't give it up? I think that's very much a possibility in the near future, depending on how the ongoing U.S. talks with Iran go. But I think the Arab states see that this is a difference, and I wouldn't be surprised if, notwithstanding the ongoing conflict in Gaza, that other Abraham Accords are not possible in the very near future, maybe even this year.
Ambassador, just about a minute and a half left. So Iran, the common enemy, the Shiite versus the Sunni. But when we talk about these business deals, I think history would tell us we've got to be careful when it comes to military technology, because if Iran is eliminated and we have some of these other Gulf states, and in particular you made reference to Syria and that conversation that took place between the new leader and the president, should we not be guarded about our military technology going to that region?
Absolutely, and I think steps are normally taken there. We consult with Israel on any major arms shipment to the Arab states to preserve what has been called over the years Israel's qualitative edge, and I think that continues to be the policy. But hopefully, if diplomatic recognition spreads and Israel gets more contacts, you could see a much closer relationship between Israel and the Arab states. And that in and of itself would be a real guarantee. With that conflict fading into history, the Middle East really would have changed prospects.
I think you're right. I think it's something we have to go into with our eyes wide open, and it's a managed peace. I don't think it's going to be a permanent peace. That's yet to come in the future. Ambassador John Bolton, always great to see you. Appreciate your insights, and thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. Glad to do it.